the respiratory system, all organisms have to have a way, all animals, I'm sorry, have to have a way, well actually all organisms, have to have a way to get oxygen to perform cellular respiration. And so oxygen is in the air, of course, or in the water, wherever the animal lives. And they have to have a way to get oxygen in. They take oxygen into their circulatory system, which we talked about previously, and to perform cellular respiration. Cells produce carbon dioxide and pump that out. So most aquatic animals have gills. Okay, and I want to talk particularly about gills, and there's some different pictures in this slideshow. Here are where the gills of a starfish is, for example. Here are the gills in a segmented worm that lives in the water. Here are the gills of clams inside of their body surface here. Crayfish, same kind of form. But we want to talk about especially something called countercurrent flow or countercurrent exchange. It's a really important idea in biology and an important adaptation that fish have. So here's a fish, and the idea of this is that as a fish swims, water flows over its gills. Okay, if you watch a fish swim through the water, it'll open and close its gill flaps on the side here. Okay, and as it does that, water is basically pumped over the gill. Inside of the gill are filaments, basically outfoldings of skin that are very, very high in blood. That's why they're all red. If you've ever seen a fish gill in a living fish, you'll know that they're red. And so water flows over it in this direction, okay, or in this direction. Now, a common misconception is that fish do this. They take the oxygen off of a water molecule, and that is not true. Fish breathe, quote, dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is in water. There are oxygen molecules dissolved, where they don't form air bubbles, really, that you can see. It's dissolved in water. And it's that free oxygen that they use. That's why you have to run a bubbler in a fish tank, for example. Okay, run a machine that puts oxygen into the water. So anyway, as a fish swims, or as water flows over the gills, the water that enters the gill on this side of the gill is 100% oxygen. In other words, all the oxygen in the water that's going to be in the water is in there. Now, the interesting thing about countercurrent exchange is that blood flow through the capillary. If water flows in this direction, blood flows in that direction. Countercurrent. They flow opposite. Why is that important? Well, I think it's easiest to show this by showing the opposite way first. If blood flowed in the other direction. Okay? And so if we look at it this way, if water flowed in this direction, and water came in at 100% oxygen here, and blood flowed in this direction, and blood came in at, we'll use the number they have over there on the thing, 5% oxygen. So you're going to get a lot of diffusion of oxygen here. But the problem is, as soon as you get down to 50% oxygen in the water, and you get to 50% oxygen in the gill, that's equilibrium. And so as this drops below 50%, let's say 49, and this is above 50%, oxygen would actually go from the gill to the water. Instead, it's something called countercurrent exchange, where the lowest percent of blood, of oxygen in blood, was where the water is the lowest percent. So instead, as water comes in, let me erase all the ink a second. As water goes this way, it goes from 100%, let's say, down to 10%. They use 15 here. As water comes in, it's at 100%. Blood is coming from this direction. So the blood that enters the gill is really low in oxygen. The water is low in oxygen, but you still get a net movement from 15% oxygen to 5. There's a higher partial pressure of oxygen here than here, and water and oxygen moves in that direction. If we go to the other end, water comes in as all the oxygen it's going to have, and so there's, even though blood is still coming, blood is 90%, so there's still a net movement of oxygen into the blood, and so on. That's called countercurrent exchange. That increases the efficiency of moving oxygen from the blood into the from the water into the blood. It's a really important concept in understanding how fish gills work, because again, if it went the other way, if it was the same current exchange, okay, again, you'd have 5% here, lots of diffusion, but as soon as you got to 50% in the water, you'd be at 50% here, net movement would go the other way, and that would be bad for the fish. So countercurrent exchange is how fish gills work. A couple of other adaptations in respiratory systems. Insects have a tracheal tubule system where they have holes along their abdomen. Oxygen comes in those holes and bathes the cells directly with oxygen. Remember that insects also have an open circulatory system. So this kind of goes together. You bathe the hemolymph with oxygen. Many other organisms have lungs. Humans have lungs. Okay? The big difference is there's two ways to get air in. If you're a human, you have what's called negative pressure breathing. In other words, you decrease the pressure, you expand your chest cavity by moving your diaphragm down and your rib cage out, and air comes in. A frog uses positive pressure breathing, and you can, if you take a look at this PowerPoint or in your textbook, you'll read about this, where frogs actually increase pressure in their throat and literally, almost literally, swallow air. Almost literally swallow it. It's called positive pressure breathing. And so you see in humans, air comes in, down all these little ducts, into these things called alveoli, little air sacs. And again, around there, kind of like gills, is blood coming in with low in oxygen, and blood leaves high in oxygen. Okay? Again, going from air to circulatory system to cell. That's the respiratory system in animals.